Okay, we're recording. Right, I want to talk about Genesis. The last few months I've been tripping over video after video on YouTube, laying out people's personal preferences about what are the best Genesis albums, and they normally go from worst to best. I'm going to do the same today. But one of the things that I have spotted is that a lot of people are doing these videos for multiple bands. So they're doing for Genesis, of course, for Yes, for Rush, for Pink Floyd, for any number of other bands. And I'm kind of thinking, well, how close are they to the music of each of these bands? Now, for me, Genesis were probably my favourite band of all time. Now, I've moved on from Genesis and my musical tastes now are very eclectic. But Genesis was the first band that I ever saw live. I've been following them since about 1974 when a friend of mine lent me that album, Selling England by the Pound. And then I went to see them on the Lamb tour. And I saw them on many, many tours, many occasions, right up until the Calling All Stations tour. More of that a little bit later. But before I go kind of the rundown of the albums from number 15 of their studio albums, I'll talk a little bit live albums at the end. Before I go through the 15, I just want to sort of just kind of lay out the territory. Genesis mean different things to different people. There's no doubt about it. I mean, if you're a fan of edgy pop, rock, the big stadium sound, you went to gigs in the 1980s and maybe the 1990s and it was a family affair, you went with your boyfriend or girlfriend, then you know the sort of albums that are going to probably appeal to you the most. If instead you were one of these people who listened to Genesis in their bedroom as teenagers, and you like the more interesting, the more complex music of the earlier period, some of which returned a little bit later, then you favour other albums as well. And I think it's worth saying as well that the sound changed, not just the style of the music changed, but the sound changed over the whole of the Genesis period when they were kind of a going concern. The thing what was really interesting, I think, about the 70s music was that you often couldn't tell which was the guitar and which was the keyboards that were playing the melody line or whatever. There were so many different sounds coming out of both guitar and keyboards at the time, and the dynamic range in the music meant that you just didn't quite know, on first listening, where the music was going to go next. And that sound, that real complexity and that dynamism definitely changed after Peter Gabriel left the band and Phil Collins stepped up from the drum stool to the mic. And I think that ended up in a situation where the music became more predictable, hugely enjoyable, no doubt about it. And still, certainly when it came to the live shows throughout the 80s, they threw lots of different stuff in there, including lots of old songs and old melodies, and they were as dynamic and as exciting as ever. But the albums were slightly different. So it's kind of what you like as what you would say are the best to the worst or the worst to the best is kind of going to be dependent to a large degree on what type of Genesis music do you prefer. So anyway, I'm going to give you my opinion as someone who's been following the band for 50 years almost. So, what's my worst or least favourite Genesis album? It's this one. This is the one I go back to the least. I don't understand why this one is so loaded. And Mama, as a track, it's considered to be a real classic. But I just think this whole album is really pedestrian. It's got this token prog component, which is Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea. Just the keyboard sound on all of this stuff is just the same damn sound seemingly all the way through. So it just doesn't seem to make much sense to me at all. It's just not exciting. Huge radio play, several hits coming from the album. But I think this is Genesis really playing it for the big audience. And so consequently, just my least favourite album. My second least favourite album is usually the one that comes last in everybody else's list, which is From Genesis to Revelation. Now this is a reissue. I've had several versions of this over the years. Unfortunately, never the original, which was worth a lot of money. But this is the second worst Genesis album. but it's not boring. Sometimes people call it, talk about this as it's got folk tendencies. Folk has got nothing to do with this album. This is a Bee Gees pastiche. This is Jonathan King taking a band who had these acoustic numbers, a little bit of dynamics going in and that sort of stuff, but at the same time kind of smoothing out the sound so much, kind of desperate to get to hang off the Bee Gees. I mean, we're talking about Bee Gees late 60s, so anybody who follows them knows this was way before they became disco icons. But some really interesting stuff on this, and as you listen to it, you kind of imagine if they had the big keyboards and the big Hackett guitar on that, and the big production without the strings, you'd think there's some good tracks, there's some promise shown in this album. But still, nevertheless, it's the second worst Genesis album. Number 13 on the list, in my mind, is this one, Abacab. This album of two sides. I think the first album is great. The production is really dynamic, thrusting. The title track, great pop single, no doubt about it. But the second side, I mean, who done it? Dodo, Man on the Corner, just substandard, so unmemorable. But you know, good live shows at the time. But number 13, number 12, the greatest hits. Is it greatest hits? Might as well be the greatest hits. Here we are, Invisible Touch, Land of Confusion, In Too Deep, Throwing It All Away, Domino, another concession to the prog early years. This is Genesis to me, where I kind of think they lost their way a little bit. And that's probably quite a controversial statement to some people. But, you know, they keep putting in these prog tracks like Domino here on this album. But really, it's just, in comparison to what they've done before, it's so second division. So second rate. So, even though it's got some, you know, individual tracks, great to hear, you just think as an album, it's just lacking. It's just not the Genesis that many people know and love. But still, appeals to a lot of people. Right, number 11. Calling All Stations. A real cop-out. Collins had left. They decided, they probably already had a lot of music written, but not recorded. They decided to audition a whole lot of singers and to replace him, and they ended up with Ray Wilson, of course, as Stilskin. This album is kind of interesting, but it's half-baked. It gives me the impression that they wanted to move on, to go to more intricate stuff, maybe once more, to kind of rekindle some of those progressive rock tendencies. But they didn't want to lose the audience, and I think that was a big mistake. You can't replace Phil Collins. I mean, it's tough enough to replace him as a drummer. Replace him as a singer, just impossible. So they should have really gone for prog again, but with a modern twist. Made the music, made the instrumentation a little bit more interesting, get back to a more dynamic sound. But they copped out. They bottled it, in my view. And I remember seeing them on this tour, and the band did a pretty good job. But to be fair, you know, they ended up encoring with you know, Icon Dance, and it was too much for me. I just thought they don't know what sort of band they want to be anymore. So that is half-baked attempt, short promise. I think they should have continued with Wilson. Maybe if they'd had a little bit more vision, they would have gone for David Longdon from Big Big Train, who auditioned as well and is a good songwriter, a really good songwriter, and a great voice as well. If they'd somehow kept at it, they might have turned that into something really good. And number 10, top 10, the 10th worst album, Genesis, and then there were 3. Now, I saw them at Nebworth on this tour, also managed to see them sound checking the day before. Really great day out. So much wanted them to do well. Obviously Hackett had left, and this is the problem. There are some great tracks on this. Follow You, Follow Me, simple but really nice. Burning Rope is really good as well. Many others, but completely let down by Mike Rutherford's guitar. I mean, Mike Rutherford's turned into a half-decent guitar player over the years. But when you think of the bank of effects that Steve Hackett used to use, and the varying sounds, the way that guitar used to sing in Hackett's hands, you're giving it to a second-rate guitar player here. And make no mistake, Rutherford's a great songwriter and a great band member, but he's, at least at this point, he wasn't a great guitarist, and it bloody well showed. So that, sadly, was a great disappointment. Still go back to it though, because some good tracks on there. Number 9, Trespass. Trespass, Looking for Someone, White Mountain, The Knife, of course, the first prog album that they did, the one with Anthony Phillips in there on guitar before Hackett and Collins arrived. I mean, this particular edition here, there's another version behind me. This particular edition has got the Nick Davis remastering, remixing. Sounds much better than it ever did. But really, it was early beginnings. I mean, sure, it was a huge leap forward from Genesis to Revelation, but didn't quite make it. But still, we're getting into good stuff now. No doubt about it. Some good stuff. Some classic tracks there as well. This is a bit of a controversial choice for number 8. Despite what I've said already about I Can't Dance, We Can't Dance. This was, in my book, a return to form. I think maybe what was happening is that after the 80s and the peak of Invisible Touch, the band took a little bit of a rest and then was beginning to realise that they peaked as a commercial proposition. So they were a bit more ambitious here. I mean, No Son of Mine, Driving the Last Spike, Fading Lights, some absolute epics on here. Really got beautifully recorded. Some great lyrics as well. And that's one of the things that's I would say about Genesis. I've never really been that interested in lyrics. And now, of course, was Peter Gabriel as the main lyricist in the earlier days. Came up with some really interesting concepts, some themes. So, I mean, we'll talk about Lamb Lies Down on Broadway in due course. But there was some really interesting stuff that came from the pen of Gabriel. Once they got into the 80s and the pop years, the lyrical content just fell flat. It was just a whole load of nothing as far as I'm concerned. But the storytelling comes back a little bit more here. So I really like this album. I think it's a double album, so it's quite a lengthy thing. But it's nevertheless got some great epic tracks on it, and it's nice to listen to. There's a lot to explore on this album. Then we have number 7, Duke. What a leap forward from And Then There Were Three. I mean, when you think about Behind the Lines, Duchess, Guide Vocal, Turn It On Again, Duke's Travels, Duke's End, some really great stuff here. Sounds good with the Nick Davis remix, but it'll never sound as dynamic as when they did it live, because Behind the Lines live was just blew your socks off. Absolutely fantastic. Really good. But Misunderstanding. Awful. Some pretty awful pop tracks on here as well. 1 or 2 to be fair. But even, Please Don't Ask. Collins kind of maudlin, so kind of a solo track. Still good for what it is. Still really good. But yeah, some great prog sounding stuff on here. Big dynamic swings. Great album. No doubt about it. Number 6. Nursery Crime. Once again, sounding better than ever under Nick Davis. Fantastic tracks. The Return of the Giant Hogweed. My favourite Genesis track of all time, probably The Musical Box, The Fountain of Salmacis, and a couple of other more quieter, more pastoral type tunes. Just a fabulous album, but the live versions blow this out of the water. So you can't listen to The Musical Box on here without realizing that the best version sits on Genesis Live. But still, great album, fantastic creativity. Hackett and Collins had just joined the band. Another huge leap forward. Fantastic album. Right, top 5. Now this could be almost in any order, but here we go. Trick of the Tail. I remember as a young lad going to a record shop in Newcastle in the UK, watching the videos on a loop of the title track of this album, but also Ripples. It was playing every lunchtime I was working. Every lunchtime I'd take my sandwich and go up to the record shop and watch the videos on a loop. Bought this on the day of release. Absolutely blown away. Tremendous. I mean, apart from Trick the Tail itself, which is a kind of a little bit quirky, and a little bit more poppy than what we were used to. So many brilliant tracks. Madman Moon, Dance on a Volcano, dynamic as heck. Ripples, of course. Robbery, Assault and Battery, Los Endos, amazing, really good. Saw them in '76 on this tour in Glasgow, in Scotland. Never forget it. One of my top 3 concerts of all time. Love this album still. The one afterwards, slightly better. Why? Because of One for the Vine. Everything that was brilliant about Genesis in those early years and that they managed to hold on to when Colin stepped up to the mic is still captured here. You have got wild dynamic swings. I mean, it sounds great on vinyl, but it's about 50 minutes this album, so it needs to be turned up really loud to get the best from it. Fantastic opening with 11th Earl of Mar, and One for the Vine just keeps going. Crescendo after crescendo after crescendo. Blood on the Rooftops, favourite for Hackett fans, no doubt about it. I must say, Your Own Special Way is right up there, one of the worst Genesis tracks ever, in my opinion. Goes on for about 6 minutes, drags on like a bad weekend. Terrible, really terrible. But as an album overall, came out in the winter, it's got a great winter feel. Huge melodies, absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I was so into Genesis at that time, I camped out for tickets all night in -5 temperatures. Managed to get front row seats for 2 nights in a row to see this tour in 1977. Absolutely great tour, great album. Top 3, controversial. Foxtrot has Suppers Ready, of course, which is epic. Considered to be by many their most favourite track by the Genesis fans. You can see why. I mean, Apocalypse in 9/8, and at the end, the big climax at the end, the coda of Suppers Ready is amazing. Preceded by the beautiful Horizons. Let down, dare I say it, by the most insipid sounding version of Watcher of the Skies I've ever heard. Those huge big chords on the Mellotron that Banks displayed on the live albums just sound really weak on here. And no matter what they can do to kind of do the remix to try and enliven it again, it just doesn't stand up. But absolute classic Genesis. Probably wouldn't start here if I was a new fan. I would start with the next album or Trick of the Tail. Here's that next album. Selling England by the Pound has Genesis's second favourite track, second best track in my opinion on it, Firth the Fifth. The best guitar solo in rock in my judgment. Really slow, soaring though, it soars on for minute after minute after minute, climaxing again and again and again. It's absolutely fantastic track. All written by Banks, and yet it's Steve Hackett's best performance on anything. Battle of Edmund Forest is great. Great storytelling there, no doubt by Gabriel as well. The cinema show, a keyboard extravaganza, Dancing with the Moonlit Night, excellent. And the first kind of popish single I had, I Know What I Like, but still weird as hell, but really good. That is most people's favourite, even though that Supper's Ready is the favourite track. Just a great album. The most wholly realised album by Genesis. But like I say, this could be number 1 in my book too. Any of these top 5 could switch places. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, my number 1. Why? Because after all these years, there's still music to be discovered here. I've listened to this 1,000 times. Got some great individual tracks. The end, people don't like the end very much. But I just think it's fabulous. I think it's absolutely fabulous. It's just the memories it brings back of my first ever concert by anyone. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. You got In the Cage, The Fountain of Slipping Men, the Lamia, Counting Out Time, the Carpet Crawlers. It's the storyline is a bit weird. Not that there's anything wrong with being a little bit weird, but it's certainly interesting. Never boring, this album. Really good album. So as I say, that's probably my favorite Genesis album, but mainly because I'm still discovering stuff in it almost 50 years after I first heard it. That's the top 15. What about the live albums? Worst to best. I'm not going to talk about the longs and the shorts, those albums that were released mainly on CD, I think, after the Week on Dance tour. Good as though they are, but the versions are, apart from the live medley on the longs, they were basically replications of the studio tracks. I'm going to pick the top 3 Genesis live albums. This one, 3 Size Live. Really good version of Behind the Lines, One for the Vine. It's a really good album. Got a soft spot here because it has it and Watcher of the Skies. That was recorded at the Glasgow gig on the Trick of the Tail tour that I was in attendance at. Good album. Little bit kind of doesn't really hang together that well. It doesn't seem quite so coherent. I don't quite understand that. Maybe it's the fact that they've gone back to the 76 tour as well with Bill Bruford on drums. The second worst Genesis album, live album, Seconds Out. This is a remaster. What is this? This will have to be remaster. It sounds absolutely stunning. What a fantastic version of this album. Brilliant album. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway with the climax of the musical box is amazing. The Carpet Crawlers, the version of Supper's Ready is great. Dance on a Volcano in Los Angeles, amazing. Pretty faultless album, no doubt about it. But by this time, they were putting out some really great albums that were beautifully produced, very dynamic. I love it. But, you know, a bit eclectic. So my preference is for this album. This has the definitive version of all of those early classics bar Supper's Ready, although you can on a bootleg get a version which has got Supper's Ready on it. Watch of the Skies opens it up, utterly epic, fantastic. And then you've got the musical box. I mean, there's the musical box and the knife on side too, here. What's great about this album, the band, they sound absolutely ferocious. I mean, all that 80s sound and the pop-friendly hits, the radio-friendly hits, all good for what they are, no doubt about it. But Genesis had this reputation for being a bit fey, a little bit too melodic, not difficult enough to get into. But they sound on fire on this album, bordering in places almost like on heavy metal. Although you wouldn't characterize the whole album in that way at all. It's an absolute prog classic, the definitive versions. So that's it. That's my top 15 or top 18 Genesis albums with the live albums tapped on at the end. Useful and interesting. Will I get around to doing other bands? Well, the only other band that I'm a huge fan of, or have been over the years, is Springsteen and the E Street Band. I might do something about that in the future, but I'm just kind of a little bit agitated by these Genesis fans that might not have been as committed to some of the more committed Genesis fans, and you know, that's fair enough. There are people who are a lot more enthusiastic and more committed even than me. But I wanted to do Genesis, get that off my chest, and give you an indication as to why I like Genesis, why a lot of people like Genesis, and then walk you through the worst of the best albums. So I hope you found it useful. You might see me again, but if not, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks a lot for watching.